Many of them I've already spoken to about the project, so, but you know, they're the ones who are, you know, sort of our ambassadors to the public. They give our tours for adults and children, and so they really just want to learn as much as they can from you all being here today. So, I'm going to hand it over to Alan.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today. I have a soft spot in my heart for docents. In my former life, I was a project manager for the public art program at the LA Metro, and I founded the docent program there. As far as I know, I'm not there anymore, but I was there for 24 years, and we had, at the time, 18 volunteer docents and one coordinator that was 20 hours a week, I believe, far last. So I know you guys are at the front line, you know, so. When I first met Cassandra, we walked the space, and you know, there were basically 3 rooms that she wanted me to occupy. So of course, obviously three separate pieces. And this is sort of typical of my work. It's kind of all over the place and chaotic, and not chaotic, but you know, sort of like just very diverse. So one aspect that we talked about was doing a residency or some sort of community outreach, or what they call public engagement project. I had a solo show at a Koreatown in Los Angeles gallery called Visitors Welcome Center, and I did a series of public engagement projects there. So that's the show that Cassandra went to go see. And so step one, so I went to UC Irvine a long time ago, and it was, I always saw the sign Little Saigon, but I'm not familiar at all with Little Saigon. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity to learn a little about Little Saigon. And so my practice is I love to like meet people and, you know, ask questions and listen, find out stories and all that sort of thing. Not unlike what docents do, right? You guys want the inside scoop, basically. I think that's the reason people become docents often, or one of the reasons. And you get to meet artists, so you know, more power to you. So we just started going to Little Saigon, and I have a couple of friends who are Vietnamese, and who here knows Little Saigon well? Not well?
Been there, maybe?
I mean, my son went to Cal State Long Beach, so sometimes we go out to dinner there, and I think that's the extent. I know where some good bar places are, and that's about it. We've met some amazing people. We've had tours of Buddhist temples. We've met reporters from
It's hard to say.
I don't know how you...
The newspaper.
Vietnam, yeah. It's the International Vietnamese, it's, I don't know, U Viet, but it's basically the International Vietnamese newspaper. And I recently went to a music concert at the Institute of Vietnamese Studies. So what I'm saying is, there's so much more than the food, right? And I didn't have access to that. I don't know if you guys did, but that's what this project is about. So we designed 6 field trips. And I guess the museum will try and get people to come to these.
Yeah.
But you know, it's open to anybody. You guys can come too, anybody can come, you know, bring your families. And for instance, this one, which is gonna happen soon, November 17th, we're gonna just meet at the Asian Garden Mall. This is the oldest mall in Little Saigon. I'm not sure if it's the original, but it's where they have that summer festival. That's amazing. That actually Cassandra and I went to as a field study. It's been a lot of fun, and we're gonna do a plein air day. Not day, maybe like an hour and a half actually. And you know, we'll walk around the mall, set up. You could bring your watercolors or your drawing material, and we'll just draw. And then at the end of the session, we'll share. And I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do this, but maybe I'll document it on my phone and print it out. And as each of these start happening, we're just going to fill this whole area with stuff from the field trips. And I'm hoping at the end of it, it'll be sort of this digest, you know, of going beyond the food, Little Saigon. And so as I mentioned, I have two friends who are Vietnamese, and I have history in Little Saigon, so I interviewed them, and anyone could sit here and listen to that. And they're very funny and very insightful. Anne Fong, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, you heard a lot about this term boat people, you know, and I think, and so Anne was actually one of those boat people. And I don't know, I feel really weird. Yes?
I think Anne Fong was, I know her, she teaches, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I know
Anne
her.
Fullerton.
Yeah.
She's a great artist. She has an opening this weekend. She has a show up currently at Artcore in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles. So she's a prolific artist. But
She's been super helpful to us in making some of these connections.
she made all of these connections. So it helps to know these people. Now, Tim Nguyen, who's also a wonderful artist based in Los Angeles, he's a much younger artist. So it's kind of interesting to hear their adventures into the United States and how they're surviving as artists in our climate. The first thing I did was I called my buddy Isabel Avila, who's an amazing photographer, and we just drove around all those 5 freeways that kind of surround Little Saigon. And I said, Isabel, every time you see one of these cultural markers, take a picture of it. And you know, we're going like 55 or what have you, so they're not super sharp, but I think she did a good job. I just wanted to visually talk about the perimeter of Little Saigon. Like this, up until this project, this was what I thought of Little Saigon. I literally would get lost if I went in. I didn't know my way around Little Saigon. So this is sort of conceptually. And then, you know, as we get along, we'll start putting stuff in here. These are the hairsprays for the next piece I'll show you. And that's it. It's very simple. And, you know, this is not what it'll actually be finished when we finish and take it down. So here's another piece.
I would have 3 pieces that are kind of discrete projects that make up the exhibition.
So a couple years ago, I had this dream, and the dream was basically I'm with my mom in a car, we're driving, and we go into this park, a public park, like a Parks and Rec park, and all of a sudden there's like tidal waves of KKK hooded figures. I'm talking hundreds of thousands. Like, you know that movie, is it Ben-Hur, or the 10 Commandments, when the
Red Sea.
yeah, the parting of the Red Sea. It's kind of like that, but instead of water, it's KKK hooded members. So that was the dream, and then we drive out, and then it's gone. And I was like shocked at this. So through doing this project here, I had recalled when I went to UC Irvine, that was the first time I saw a KKK hood, you know, uniform. Someone had jokingly put it on a mannequin in a dorm room. It was the talk of the school that day. And since then, I've had these experiences of seeing KKK imagery. So this is in 3 parts, this particular piece. It's called Rescue. First, I have Naomi Buckley, who is a Jungian dream analysis, thank you. And she's analyzing my dream. So there's that. You can listen to the 2 sessions that I went to. And then I tried to remember every time I was confronted with KKK imagery in my life, and then I did a watercolor of that. That's what these are. And there's a very, you know, simple description of what each one is. Like for instance, you know, I don't know if you, oh, this is the time I saw it at the UC Irvine. This is Birth of a Nation, for instance. So they're all, you know, this is Blazing Saddles when the two actors dress up as a KKK member. And they still use this in baseball, but for strikeouts, they always put a K. And as a person of color, even when I was a little kid, I knew what a KKK was. And when I'd go to a game and see that KK, the third strikeout, it's like, oh, there it is again. You know, and I'm sure I'm not the only person who thought that. They still do that. This is a drawing of the dream. Now, this sheet is kind of interesting. This is not just any ordinary bed sheet. So Spike Lee is there because on one of the ESPN 30x30s, he recalls, or he's sort of the focus of when the Knicks were playing the Pacers, and when they go to Indiana for the games, you know, in Indiana, the reporters hound Spike Lee, and the first time he shows up in the airport, he goes, "Oh, it's great to be back in the home of the KKK." And I was like, what? The KKK started in Indiana? It did not. It started in Tennessee. But in the early 1900s, it had a tremendous membership of KKK members in Indiana. One out of every three white males was a KKK member in Indiana. And why is this? It has really nothing to do with African Americans. It has everything to do with, at that time, there was a tremendous Irish and Italian immigration into the United States, and they made their way to Indiana because that's where the jobs were in terms of farming. And so not unlike what's happening today with folks from South and Central America. And through paranoia, I'm sure the movie Birth of a Nation helped quite a bit. You know, that was a very promotional film for the KKK, igniting membership. And so, you know, so I actually went to Indiana 2 years ago, I think it was. And as a performative piece, I went to the local department store and rescued bed sheets. You know, you are not going to become a hood. And so, I mean, you know, they don't use this, but that was the idea. And so I actually drew the dream here. So that's me and my mom in the car. And then this is part of the wave that we were about to end. And then in here, so why am I so afraid of the KKK when I've actually never met anybody from the KKK? Well, it's marketing, you know? I mean, the tremendous fear, it's like the boogeyman, right? We see it all over pop media. And I was thinking, wow, you know, this is something that my family came from Japan in 1957. They're not really aware of the KKK. Like they think of that as something completely has nothing to do with their lives. But I and my cousins and my brother, we were born here, so that fear has been instilled in us because we rely on pop culture so much, right? And so I was thinking, what weird assimilation? I've been initiated into the fear of the KKK. And around that time, they threw away this. This was on the curb, ready to be picked up by the sanitation department or whatever. And I grew up with this. This is the matriarch that I grew up with. Used this every week. My aunt was a beautician. That's what they called them back then. Now they're called stylists or something, but this was on almost all the time, and somebody was here, like my grandmother, and then the kids would always like hang around, and we'd have a conversation, and the funny thing is, when you're in here, you can't hear anybody, and so the conversation was always one way, and then we would speak English, and they would speak Japanese, and it was kind of this thing, you know? And I thought, you know, this was their assimilation, right? After World War II, they wanted the beehive, they wanted the bouffant, you know, and that smell of Aquanet, you know, it's still in my brain, you know, I can smell it. Just saying Aquanet, I can smell Aquanet. And I thought, well, this was their assimilation. And this, when you put this on, I mean, when you sit here, it is strikingly like a hood. And I thought, that's a very interesting parallel, I thought. Is this on?
I don't know.
It's not on.
It feels like it's
Oh, it's very low.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the volume.
All right.
This one seems
That's
higher.
on. That's strange. Did
I'm
anyone mess with
interested in
it?
this to feel the...
So there's a sound. There's a soundtrack to this, and it's primarily vibrational. Like you can't really hear this. I'm using subsonics, which are the tones that are so low. If we have perfect hearing, it's 20 to 20,000 hertz. Right, 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz is what we can hear. But I don't have perfect hearing anymore, and most adults do not have perfect hearing anymore. But you can feel it though, and can you feel it?
There's a vibration of kind of yeah.
So it's a musical piece that you feel rather than you hear. And what the main tone is, it's a pond filled with frogs. And I've completely detuned that thing and turned it into a very bass note, and then I've chucked subsonics into it. And so sometimes you can hear patterns, and that is the pattern of the frogs. But, and why is that? Because one of the scenes I remember, and it's not actually in the watercolors, but like, you know, Brother, where are they? Yeah, you know, that movie. They go through the swamps, and you know, there's frog sounds. And so I thought, and I happened to be camping, and I found these frogs and sort of put two and two together. And then this is about the assimilation that I mentioned. It's kind of a non-narrative. It's just a series of images that has to do with America's view, or the Western view of Japan. And I have a friend who's playing the part of Yamato Nadeshiko, and Yamato Nadeshiko is the epitome of woman, you know, from Japan. You know, this is in kimono arts. That's all based on Yamato Nadeshiko. And I have a friend who's a kimono teacher, and I used to have these arguments, which was really weird. She's older, and she would say, no, you know, a woman's role in life is to support their husband and all this. And I said, no, you know, they should have a career. And it was like, and we'd have these fights. And that was, to me, her generation Japanese, which is like my parents, and my assimilated American, you know, liberal thinking. And so this piece is poetically about that relationship. Hey.
About the sheet,
Yes.
I'm so intrigued that you said it was like a 4-minute piece. Did you actually have it filmed when you were taking
I
pictures?
took pictures of myself on my phone. I was nervous.
And how long
It's
did
in
that
there.
take?
There is a picture of Alan with
Oh,
a sheet
okay.
and packaging
Okay.
that's in the video. And it
Okay.
kind of comes up.
Oh, great.
in
Okay.
there.
And how long did it take to make these drawings of this? What is the medium? Is it
It's a fabric marker,
Okay.
which I have no idea. It doesn't seem to run as much as like a Sharpie when it so that worked well. And then it took me a lot longer than I wished it would have taken, because I would actually get nauseous drawing one hood after another. So it actually took me like a month and a half to draw this. But
It's very effective.
like if it were teddy bears, I think I would have drawn it in like a week. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, thank you.
We're gonna keep going.
Oh yeah.
We still meet over the meeting stuff.
Oh, maybe they'll come.
I'll take you to one of my meetings. Yeah.
And we're gonna be
Wow.
So, because we have 3 other artists.
Sorry.
I know there's so much information for Alan to share. I don't want to rush you, but we're gonna keep
Okay, so
focused.
really quick. As I mentioned, my family is from Japan. They're specifically from Hiroshima. And of course, Hiroshima is famous because that's where World War II ended, basically, and the Cold War started by dropping the atomic bomb onto the city. I grew up with that fact. Some family friends are hibakushes, which is the Japanese word for survivor of the Hiroshima bomb. And it took a long time. I always felt like, as an artist, it was my responsibility to do a piece about the Hiroshima bomb somehow. And I could never go past the death thing, you know, obviously. And and then one day I was in Wendover, Utah, And it was a barbecue the day before Nancy Holt's memorial, which has nothing to do with this, but we were there, and I noticed this beautiful Quonset on the other side of the fence on an airstrip. And I said to Matthew from CLUI, Center for Land Use Interpretation, I said, that's such a beautiful building. And he said, oh, Alan, that's the Wendover hangar. That's where the Enola Gay flew out and went to Japan and dropped the bombs. And I said, oh, Matthew, did you know my family's from Hiroshima? And he was like, dude, you have to do a piece there. And it took about a year, but I came up, and this thing took like 3 years to do. So step one was to try and get permission to go inside the atomic dome and do a 3-point recording of the acoustics of the atomic dome. What I wanted to do was I wanted to play that in the Wendover hangar as if the spirit of the Enola Gay returned back to the hangar 70 plus years later. That was, to me, how I feel as a Japanese American. You know, it's very complicated. There's no, you know, it's very complicated. So so it took a year to get permission to go into that. It's a UNESCO heritage site. And luckily, I knew somebody who worked for Mayor Garcetti. And Mayor Garcetti wrote a letter to Mayor Maeda of Hiroshima, and that's how that happened. And then it took another year to get permission to go into the Wendover hangar, which is a Smithsonian historic site. And but we did it. And so I've been playing with those 2 sets of audio recordings, and I've turned it into this piece. And again, I'm using some subsonics again. The piece doesn't really work unless you lie down on these aluminum beds and put your, really, if you could put your bone, this skull bone, right onto the bed, that's the best. And then all of a sudden, you're inside the Wendover hangar and the Hiroshima dome at the same time. And there's a, you know, it's like a 17-minute piece. You don't have to lie down for 17 minutes, but you can. And these boxes, I call them sound beds. They look solid, but they're not. I copied the cajon. Do you know the cajon? The Peruvian box that they play. They sit on it, and they can make the sound of all the parts of a drum set. You ever see that played? It's a beautiful instrument. Well, that box is not a box. It's a frame with loose sheets of wood on it. And so that each piece has a different vibratory character. And that's what this is. You can play this if you wanted to, but as you can see, it's not actually welded onto the frame. And so when there's a part in the piece where it gets very loud, and so this stuff usually starts to vibrate. And that's enough. And tomorrow at 3 o'clock, I'm going to perform the piece as a vibratory sound piece at 3 o'clock, which is a short piece. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, so this is, I'm sorry, I forgot. These were here already, and so we bought these bass transducers. And so if you put your hand on there, or if you put your skull against this metal, you can also kind of, it doesn't work as good as this, but it does work, especially when it gets loud.
But what I think is really interesting, the title of this piece is, you've done different iterations
Right.
of this piece, but this one is as a room.
This is the first
And
time.
so, in some ways, you're really putting the sounds of these 2 other places into the bones of this building.
Right.
And that somehow is really powerful to me. You can feel like it's kind of translated into this space.
When you showed me the rooms, it seemed the right. right thing to do.
And I think it was.
Yeah.
picture trucks that came in at one point.
So we're going to shift gears and let Catherine tell us about her exhibition.
Hi, everyone. So this is my show. Its title is called Gone Way Beyond, which is it's a phrase from the Heart Sutra, which is a Buddhist text. And they talk about enlightenment as being this place beyond, kind of like this other shore, this place that you reach to when the self dissolves. So a lot of these, what I think of art as like kind of in practical terms as kind of having a use value in a certain way, and for me the use value is towards human consciousness. So all of these works in a certain way serve a purpose. Like these in a certain way are kind of mandalas, and I kind of think of them as screens or projections of kind of a reality. And if you look at them, they can kind of be used as meditative tools. The longer you look, kind of the space changes and they become these kinds of unfolding, infinite spaces, and within those I use a lot of emptiness, so there's a lot of negative space, and the idea of emptiness as being this kind of pathway or the end result of enlightenment is like this spaciousness, this kind of peaceful quality. And a lot of my practice is informed by my meditation practice as well. So a lot of these things come, I mean, drawing them is kind of meditative, looking at them is meditative. And then this one here is more of like it's a female form. And these are inspired by actually trips I've taken to ancient Neolithic sites where I started drawing them before I went to these sites, and then I ended up at these sites, and then I realized that the drawings kind of made this happen in a certain way, like following the trajectory of these drawings led me to these ancient sites. And then the sites were matriarchal, so this is kind of a female form. And for me, I like to kind of have her above, so she's powerful like a megalith. And for me, what's really important is like the embodiment of female power, especially in this time that we live in where the female body is under attack. To me, kind of standing in your power as a woman is a type of political dissent. And also kind of a way to repair our image of ourselves within patriarchy, because there is kind of this propagation of hatred towards women and hatred towards the female body. So for me, it's like I like to make the female body something sacred, which I feel it is, just as much as the earth is sacred. The earth is feminine, the female body is sacred. And so that's where this comes in, and I call, like, what I call these works is, they're titled different for the show, but I call them daulas, because in Menorca, which is it's one of the Balearic Islands next to Mallorca and Ibiza, there are these huge megaliths, and I ended up there 1 year, 3 years ago, and they're called daulas, which translates to table. And basically they were pre-flood, and they were during times when, and there's 13 of them on the island, so they're speculated that they are kind of activated by the moon. So, which is also another feminine kind of, trajectory. And so these are kind of the embodiment of the sacred feminine in a certain way. And in my work, there's always kind of an aspect of sacred. Like objects are sacred, they move beyond just kind of physical fetish object into a space beyond kind of like this materialistic world that we're in, they're like the opposite of Duchamp. So Duchamp makes something, he takes something and takes its use value away and then says it's art. I'm saying art has a use value, and that use value is to expand and elevate human consciousness. And then these are sculptures that I use in performances. These have been traveled with me to the Mediterranean, to Ibiza, and I use them as kind of light. I mean, you can see them now.
Only Catherine is allowed to do that.
So they're kind of,
I know it looks really fun and tempting, but please don't try it. Don't let any visitors try it.
and they're kind of like flashing in the camera right now, but they're kind of objects that capture light and reflect light in a certain way, like this idea of enlightenment as being of the light. And I also use them to kind of activate spaces. You know what? I'll take them into the next space to show you.
Don't tell them anything.
I know, yeah. So these are like the smaller versions. These are the portable ones that I've taken with me to Ibiza, Mallorca, and I make all these kinds of sites, specific videos that are kind of performances where I use my body, I'm naked in them, and I'm performing with these objects. And it's kind of also has to do with like the sacred feminine, archaic, ancient culture, which is kind of the embodiment of feminine power. But so I'm using set different iterations to kind of create little portals. And a lot of my work also is informed by like energy work. I'm also a healer, and I also practice Reiki, and along with like meditation and other forms. So a lot of these, what I'll do is when I'm in different sites, I'll kind of create these portals and set intentions with them to kind of play with the energy that's around. I mean, part of the feminine is being connected to the earth and being connected to forces that are greater than our physical plane. And so I use a lot of these objects as ways to kind of express kind of intangible experiences or that move us beyond our kind of banal physical limitations of like driving Audis and buying fancy bags or whatever. But and then also these stones are also like energetic devices, and we're gonna have like a sound healing here, and which brings us to like this kind of central object, which is the pyramid. It's a three-sided pyramid, so it's actually a tetrahedron, which is symbolic of fire. And fire is always symbolic of transformation. And I titled it a hypogea because central to the idea of like enlightenment is this losing or dissolution of the ego. And so I use death as a metaphor for that. Like when you're in meditation, the whole purpose of that is to reach this space that's kind of beyond language, this space that's kind of empty, the space of spaciousness and peace. And so these are kind of like these meditation tools in a certain way, like one can sit inside of them. And also like with art, for me, it's about experience, and as much as it's about object or drawing or two-dimensional or three-dimensional object. So like what you take away from that, which is the experience of having witnessed or interacted with the work. So I like the idea of the work being interactive. And then also on top of that is this idea of kind of the gift and generosity in art. So like we're scheduling a sound healing with a Kundalini yogi who does like gong sound practitioner. And I've done it at a gallery before where like 70 people laying out, and it's a form of meditation, but it's a lot easier to kind of introduce meditation in a kind of passive way, like through sound healing. A lot of people get really scared about like, okay, we're just going to sit in silence. And so this is kind of my way of kind of leading people towards meditation and towards a kind of spiritual practice. And just kind of like what Cassandra wrote on the press release is that during these times, I like to think of art as a kind of place of refuge. Like we're in this kind of political situation right now with everything that's going on, and it can feel super overwhelming. So I feel like art as a space of kind of refuge and peace is kind of like my way of giving back to the audience or to humanity in a certain way, rather than create more problems, or focus on the problems. I'd rather focus on kind of like our essential humanness and our connection with each other and our ability to find inner peace regardless of the situation. And like central to Buddhism is like this idea of resilience and how humans can persevere in the face of anything. And I really believe in that aspect of humanity. So my work is kind of creating a space to do that. It's like a shell or a vehicle for people to kind of have these experiences.
Just to add that the sound meditation will be on November 10th, so keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, and I invite everyone to kind of like go in the pyramid and sit down.
That's my question, is how do you envision guests to enjoy this space?
I mean, like earlier I came in and there were girls here taking pictures and sitting in it, and I see people post on Instagram them meditating in it. So it's kind of, I mean, it's free, like it's a free space, but it's kind of like I'm creating this environment that is kind of peaceful or conducive to kind of experiencing some sort of refuge.
So they can touch.
Yeah, for sure.
But clarify for me if you want people moving the larger objects around.
I
It's
mean,
more you're moving the objects
yeah,
around.
it's more like I'm
Touching is okay, but moving them, it's not like a giant problem that they do, but it's more like,
it's not essential to the conceptual like
yeah.
framework of the word. Like, and I do like them as being kind of reflective and also kind of like the reason why I choose this metal to work with is because it disappears. And this kind of whole idea of egolessness is like our self disappears. And I feel like a lot of the problems of high capitalism is this focus on the self. Like we have the I generation, selfies, and all of these things that kind of keep us in separateness. And as humans, I feel like we have to get beyond identity. We have to get beyond this kind of like I am me and you are you. It's more like we are humans and we are here and this is a collective experience. And how can we make that easier for each other? How can we affect people in positive ways? How can art affect people in positive ways? How can art heal people? These are the questions I'm asking. I don't propose to know all the answers, but I'm trying to figure something out and offer something generously with art. Like it's, you know, it's like the idea of the modernist abstractionist painter and the ego and the narcissism involved in that is the opposite of what I want to do. You know, what I want to do is kind of create a space for humanity and not just kind of this trope of the artist or this mythological aspect of the artist. For me, it's about the work serving a purpose for humanity and for the evolution of human consciousness.
And we'll see as we go through these exhibitions. I invited each of these artists to do projects or to do something with us without knowing necessarily what the work would be that we would be showing. But you'll see as we go along, and I've talked about this a little bit, but it's been wonderful for me to be able to make some really interesting conceptual connections between all of these different shows here. And we can talk about it a little bit more after everyone speaks. But Valentina's here as well, so we'll follow her into the next gallery and keep some of these ideas in mind. I mean, I think you'll recognize what I mean by some of these kind of conceptual overlaps.
For what? 15? Yes. I'm sorry it didn't come through.
Well, to get me started on that right now, I'm so mad about it.
But you know, there might be people still who are dropping out.
It's okay, I'm over it now. I'd rather be busy now. I'm kind of done with it in my head right now for a moment. I need to go in that space.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Thank you everyone for coming and for your time. My voice is very low and I have an accent, so if you don't understand, please just...
And you're welcome to come closer, yes.
Just let me know and repeat. She doesn't bite. I don't bite. I live in Mexico, in Guadalajara, in Argentina, and normally I have a lot of problems to talk about my work because I don't work with a specific media or a specific subject, but there are some like little points that I touch often with my work, and those would be writing and translating, because I also write. I don't call myself a writer, but I do write. The perception of time, which is, as you will see, very important in this show. An economy of the materials, and by economy I not only mean like cheap materials, but like a small quantity and simple materials, and as least or minimal resources as possible. And imagination, which is a word that you don't hear that much in contemporary art, but I really like embrace. So I started these works a year ago, more or less. I call them pendants, individually. And it started a year ago with a performance that I did with a friend of mine who's a dancer. And the performance consisted of me hanging him from like a 2-story spot. He was hanging from the back. And the purpose of this performance is that he would be as straight as possible, as long as possible. So he's a ballet dancer, and I worked with him in various other performances before. And usually I want him to be like, to endure as possible, as long as possible as he can in a position. But in this particular one, the purpose was that gravity would eventually take over and make him bend. So he lasted like 2 minutes in a very straight position until his body was flaccid. And from that image of him being like exhausted, all the series of collages started. Because they are collages. It's difficult to see, but they're all figures, body images of these works. So I started tracing his body as he was like hanging, but then it also grew until more images of exhausted bodies, of dead bodies, or dying bodies, limp body parts. And this is where the materiality of this work is very important. As I said before, I'm really into like as little minimal materials as possible. This is tissue paper that you probably know from paper wrap, like present wrapping. It's very particular because it changes a lot with time. So it's what you see now is different from what it was a month ago when we installed. The color will fade, and at the end you're going to see. You're going to start seeing how it's done. The glue will reveal itself. It's already revealing itself. The places where it overlaps are going to be more present, and the color will start disappearing. You'll see the grease more. Also, colors fade more than others. Blue lasts longer, for example. So it is very particular how these pieces work, because the more exposed they are, the easier they die, you could say. The faster they will die because of the light conditions, and also because of just moving and hanging. But also, the more they're exposed, they will reveal themselves like to the public. So, for example, there's a secret piece here that is all blue, but you start to see more with the color changes, the places where it's blue. So this will come more the more the time passes.
What inspired your colors? Was there any particular inspiration for the different
For
colors?
the colors, it's more like intuition. Yeah. So I tried. I think this is the only one where I use red, but I try not to use too much because the forms are not particularly nice. Where they come from, the light is more like yeah.
Do you have a particular piece in here that's meaningful to you in a special way? I'm just curious. If there's one in particular that stands out.
It's funny, but maybe the one that's behind here, the tiniest one.
Yeah.
That was also the last one I did. I did it here.
Okay.
Like the last day of the installation. But it became like a small like secret.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think I have favorite. I don't think I have so much favoritism. That I don't have so much favoritism. Favoritism.
Yeah.
Favoritism. Yeah. There are some things that I don't know. When you come from that side, these two pieces they kind of blend one with the other, and they form something different. Yeah.
Is this a glue?
It's glued. Yeah. Yeah. So normally the is like going.
Your process, do you sketch it first before you then cut and get it breaking out the different colors?
Yeah, exactly.
And the thickness of your tissue paper?
There's only one
There's only one?
in the market.
So the experience on big sheets is this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the Buto influence?
Yes. So when I look for my references for forms, there are like the all body images of lying or falling or hanging bodies. I also research a lot in Buto dance, which is a form of dance theater from Japan from the late 50s, early 60s. And there's this very important movement that is falling. So dancers fall to the floor because it's a way of referring or like getting close to what lies beyond or beneath our feet. And it's also a way of talking about death, which is very important in Buto. It's not necessarily about beauty, but also about decay and death. And I've been practicing for the last, not so long, maybe 3 years. So some of the imagery that is here comes from there. It's not all, yeah.
Just to clarify, did you say something about body forms?
Yes.
That's what you traced. So
Yeah.
by looking at it, yeah, I can see asking kids which color might be the body of form.
Mm.
What is it? Which is the trace of the body?
Well, there are very like focused or fragmented parts. So some are very difficult to recognize. I think, for example, this one is easy, kind of.
Yes.
This body, wait a second. It is. I cannot do that, but it's like this. So this is a back. And this is one leg going up. And this is one leg going down. This leg is broken. So it's not very recognizable. And
Doesn't
there's
have
just
to be
like
except
this.
to you. Yes.
I think that the relationship to the body is more easy to perceive in the material itself, not so much in the drawing, but in the sense that the material also decays.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What do you intend to do with the art objects at the end of the exhibition?
We'll throw them away.
And also, and talk about the colors fading, and you can already see, you know, in the month that things have been up. This one in particular, you can start to see.
Yeah.
So do you photograph them before you just destroy them?
Yes. So I'm going to photograph them at least once a month. To see how. Yes, to see how they change, because they change a lot.
Do you think it'd be accurate to draw a comparison between these beautiful works and the body and the fragility and the always changing way that the body has? Would that be an okay way to describe
Totally.
these?
Yes.
Okay.
What about skin? Shedding of skin? Do you make that relationship?
Well, I haven't thought that much about
Intention.
skin, but it's definitely accurate.
You
Yeah.
know, I feel like
Yeah.
when you find snake skin, it's the same
Exactly.
concept.
Yeah, it's totally the same concept. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
One other question. The first time we saw this, the air conditioning was on campus.
Yes.
And they were blowing.
Yes.
And it was really effective.
I know.
So, as
Too
a
effective.
performance art, do you ever, show how these are affected by gentle breezes?
Well, something that I particularly like is the sound of the pieces. So maybe you don't feel it that much now because we're a lot of people. But when you come close to them, the pieces either get close to you or they go far away, and they start making noises.
Yeah, static.
Yes, exactly.
That's great.
Yes.
Static electricity.
So
Just runs around.
yes. So even if there's no air conditioning here now, because it was too strong and it was destroying. But still, like when you walk by them, they still move, and they still make this like cracking noise that I think makes it more effective when we are not so many people. But yeah.
How long do they take to do?
To fake?
No, how long did it take to fabricate this? Yeah.
Well, it depends. I would say around 3 days each.
What do you say?
3
Yeah.
days.
Because the paper is very delicate and they break. And I mean, the smaller ones are easier also to work around. But that one broke 9 times.
We have a first aid kit, so as little tears happen here and there, we'll do our best to keep them repaired, but also part of it is to let the work kind of have its own evolution.
Yes.
Did you buy the paper here in the States?
No, I brought them. I brought them the works from Mexico.
Did you make in Mexico? Oh my God, they were kites with this paper?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
And why this material?
Why this material? Well, first because it came on handy. Like this is something that's very easy to work with because there's a lot. I mean, you use it like for Day of the Dead, for example, for this papel picado. And you see it, I see it every day, and I see it change every day. Like there are like banners on the streets and like little flags, and I see how it changes from one color to the other. So it just became a very, I don't know, familiar material to me.
Is that the association you have with that use? Because for me, I immediately associated with the kites because that's what we used to do all the time, but with paper, but I don't know if that's the same association you have in your head.
Well, I didn't think about much of kites, but I've done it now that I think about it. When I was a child.
No, you have to be very careful when you glue the paper too, so it wouldn't rip and stay in place.
Exactly.
That's why I'm asking if you had that, because I have the association, but you may have a different one. That's why I want to know what the paper
my
means to you.
association is usually more into festivities.
Got it.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess.
So when
That's
you
what
have,
we're seeing.
I'm assuming it's tissue paper also.
Yes.
Did you use starch to make it hard?
No, it's only glued.
It's only glue.
It's very toxic glue. Because most of the water glue destroys the paper. So yeah, it has to be something that doesn't change the color and doesn't wrinkle. It's tricky.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
There are probably lots more questions, but I want to introduce Mariana. She's here, and we can follow her into her installation and exhibition around the corner.
That's good.
So, if possible, I would like to go around before I start talking.
We will follow you. There are many different elements, so.
Soto Diaz, and this project is called Everyday Grappling Operations, and you could say for short, EAGLE. So I grew up in Venezuela, and I studied martial arts growing up. And my teacher was a very important person to me, and he introduced me to Buddhism and Taoism growing up, and it was a very, very significant experience growing up. And so when I studied judo, I went, from white to yellow belt to orange belt to green belt to blue and to brown. And so the reason why I do this is because, the form of the coil itself, or the spiral, is a kind of repetitive form that reminds me in many ways of what it means to have a daily practice. So sometimes, you may think that by having a daily practice, that you're just repeating yourself. But I believe that every repetition has a different kind of significance. And so, for example, if you have a piece of paper and you take a corner in a room and you place a piece of paper every single day, by the end of the year you have 365 pieces of paper, and that creates a significant stack. So in a similar way, I feel like with the coil shape, you get this feeling of you're starting from zero. You know nothing about martial arts. You go in there with a white belt, full of humility, and you start learning. And then soon enough, you advance to the yellow belt. And soon enough, you advance to orange, and to green, and to blue, and brown. It took me 16 years to get to brown, and I, at a certain point, decided to take the black belt, and I couldn't do it. And so I felt like, how could I possibly wear a black belt in front of white belts? I had seen films by Jigoro Kano, the founder of judo. I have seen my teacher practice, and I felt like I had no way to measure up. So I had a kind of crisis in confidence when I was going to advance for my black belt. So I left the country and I went to a Buddhist monastery for 2 years because I thought that would be a good way to advance, to really focus and study what I needed to study. Long story short, I left the Buddhist monastery and had a family, etc., etc. I'm here, and I decided as a middle-aged woman to pick up judo again. It is a very, very difficult practice. Every time I have gone in, I come out and I am sore. It is a very, very difficult practice in many different ways. So this is actually what I'm interested in accessing. What is it that is difficult? What is the struggle? It's not just about discipline. It's about this other thing, perhaps consciousness, that Catherine was talking about earlier. So I'm interested, through this project, I'm interested in accessing that which goes beyond divisions of body and mind. So it is about the body, it's about training the body, but it's also about training the mind. And it's about training something else. So what is that something else? That's also what I'm interested in accessing. So through this project, I am using judo, the martial art, as a way to access this other thing. And one of the things that I'm interested in every single one of my projects is, how to deal with identity or gender issues in a way that makes sense for me, given my family history, given my experience, given my upbringing visually too. There is a very important part of my upbringing which has to do with modernism. My parents were both architects, and I have an abiding interest in modernism and formal forms, like the formal sensibility of color, of shape, of composition. These are all things that are very, very interesting to me. And so for each of my projects, I explore a different set of parameters that I set out to explore. And so I work in a very intuitive way, and which I try to also combine with a conceptual framework. And so I try to create a mix that is almost like a matrix that has different conversations, threads of different conversations intersecting. And so, so in this case, you could say that yes, the personal thread is about me having practiced judo and now taking it on as an adult. And then, there are also other threads and conversations that have to do, for example, with with color theory. And so here in this particular project, I am accessing color theory from a totally different perspective that has to do with that kind of resilient kind of daily practice, right? So you go from white to yellow to orange to green to blue to brown. So that is what you see throughout the installation, is the repetition of these colors as a reminder, and through the coil as well. So it's that reminder that it's about accessing that path to this other thing, that has to do with consciousness and commitment and various other things. And how do you approach power? Also, that's also a really interesting thread that enters in this project, which I don't know if you see here that I created a kind of symmetry or imperfect symmetry. And so I'm interested in that as a way to access practice that is dialogical and relational. So when you're practicing judo, you could practice on your own, but most likely than not, you're practicing with an opponent, right? So there's grappling. So that's also where the word comes from, everyday grappling operations. So you're practicing, you're grappling with your opponent to get better. And so one of the main philosophical issues in judo is that you don't attack, but you actually use the force of your opponent against them. And so to me, this is actually a very, very interesting part of the history of judo, because Jigoro Kano, the founder of judo, was very interested in adapting martial arts form to a more kind of peaceful philosophical framework. And he was a very petite man, and he was bullied quite a bit. And so he studied physics and he practiced in such a way that he was able to develop a form that was efficient and that didn't have to do with force, with brute force, but actually it was a smart, efficient way to kind of pivot that kind of attacking energy. So I like to use this metaphor of judo too to address issues of power. How can you do that? And like Catherine was saying before, I'm not providing an answer, but for me, my work provides an environment in which to explore these questions, pose them, to the public. And so you might have noticed that I painted this pegboard, or drew the pegboard structure on this wall. And that pegboard structure is repeated in other works as well. So the pegboard pattern is significant, for several reasons. One is that it provides a kind of minimalist structure of repetition that also has to do with daily practice. With this sensibility that, when you do a daily practice, there's a kind of rhythm, a repetitive rhythm that comes in. But then there's also the sense in which, for me, the pegboard acts as a kind of metonym for practice in general, for the kind of thing that you have to engage in. So it's, perhaps addressing that more of a sense of discipline or of commitment. So it's about practice, right? So it's not about providing solutions, but it's what do you do when you're engaging in practice? And so one of the interesting things about this project, though, for me, is that I'm trying to access this place of strength from a place of vulnerability. And so for me, this is key. So I'm not telling you I'm a marathonist, that I'm going to win, right away. I am telling you I am in a vulnerable position, and I am accessing that place of strength through that, through pre-committing every single time to this practice, even while you're fearing that you might fail. Because I'm not in my 20s anymore. So it's about the fragility of the body, but it's also about a fragility of, this sense that actually I'm putting myself in a kind of vulnerable position. And I'm asking others to join me as well, so that it has an Instagram component. So I'm hoping that others will join me with their challenge. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a martial arts challenge. It could be anything. Something that is difficult for you. That from the get-go you're saying, this may not work, but let's try it. And the idea of that kind of reaching out, I'm not naturally a super extrovert, but my idea through this outreach part is that you're able to access that sense of community and interconnectedness with people from that place of vulnerability.
Can you elaborate on
the two corners, yes. So the two corners have mats, practicing mats, judo mats, and I will be engaging in practice twice a week. And so the schedule will be posted on the website. And so I am inviting others, to others from the dojo to practice with me. But also they're, like I was saying before, judo has all these levels, and so one of them is the physical practice, but the other one is a mental practice, and this other more kind of psychological, perhaps, or philosophical ways of approaching martial arts, and or the core of martial arts. And so one of the things that I'm going to be doing there is not just practice through my body, but also practice mind-centering exercises with some of the coil paintings, and studying as well.
And that'll be Fridays and Saturdays from 11 to 1.
Right. And so the other thing that I wanted to mention is that I found an amazing, even though they're not here, I feel like I should acknowledge, publicly that I am studying with judoka from a dojo in Costa Mesa, Nori Bunasawa. And that dojo has 3 world champions, and it's an amazing dojo. It operates in a kind of makeshift fashion in a Buddhist temple,